Fission radio show with your host, Lonnie Clark. We stand together and accept that we now live in a world transformed by Fukushima. Monday, Wednesday, and Friday from 8 a.m. to 9 a.m. Pacific Standard Time here on UCY.TV radio. We relentlessly engage every ear that listens. We expose and confront the complete lack of accountability for the nuclear industry. Consider social engineering programs who view our bodies, minds, and souls as assets on a balance sheet. We discuss vital current issues, interview activists, and engage our audience in an effort to allow all voices to be heard. The Age of Vision radio show creates a venue that all will choose. We encourage our listeners to reclaim their power and their courage to take action and save our planet from the ravages of greed and indifference. Our actions matter. Every voice matters. We remind our listeners that happiness is resistance. Love is greater than fear. Good morning, UCY.TV radio listeners. This is Lonnie Clark with the Age of Fission radio show. Thanks for joining us. Today is August 2nd, 2017. And I want to tell my dad happy birthday, although I know he's not listening, but I feel obligated to say happy birthday to my dad. Today we have with us someone that I'm super excited to have back on with us. She's, I guess, a citizen activist, Heidi Lambert, who grew up in Hanford and has been becoming more and more outspoken about the reality of what nuclear pollution does to our lives, our bodies, and our families. So thanks, Heidi, for joining us again. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Lonnie. I really appreciate being here.
Yeah. So I'm just going to ask you, like I normally do, as I let my people that I interview sort of lead the conversation. What is it that's on your mind? We know you grew up near Hanford. Your dad was a Hanford worker. He suffered, became disabled, and died a very early death. And you give us always some different ideas on how to think about this. So what's on your mind today?
Well, I have family who still lives in Tri-Cities, in Kennewick and in Richland. And so in talking to them throughout the last couple months and stuff, I started to think, they talk a lot about the struggles of their friends and the people that they know and who we've grown up with. And I've started to realize, like, how many people are suffering from mental illness and physical illness. And I think, I wonder if there's really any studies of the relation. I mean, I know there's studies.
Dr. Goffman had studies of that. Dr. Goffman and Tamplin did. They said they said there was a direct correlation. One of the first symptoms of long-term low-level exposure to nuclear pollution is schizophrenia.
Right. Well, and I could see that, and I also feel like they also kind of create that atmosphere, the government, because they lead such a facade that everything is safe and everything's perfect, and the town is so clean and everything's great. You know what I mean? But then you start to dig deeper into it, and you start to see people kind of suffering from paranoia, not being able to really know what a good decision is, and it's so interesting because that area is so polluted with drugs too, with methamphetamine and just misuse of pharmaceuticals. And it was just when we talk about Hanford, I wanted to talk kind of about it in the present sense of what does it look like now, Yeah. When we usually talk about it, we usually talk about it in the 70s or in the 80s, and even sometimes we've talked about it in the 2000s. But just of late, I go there and it's just like my sister, she's in her mid-30s, and almost every person she's graduated from high school has suffered from cancer. And
Wow.
then the people who haven't suffered from cancer have done really weird things, like a carjacking or a robbery, and I guess that can be from desperate times, but it makes me think that they're suffering from mental illness and drug addiction, and it's just really too bad. But the point is what I'm trying to say is that I think that you have the people who work out at Hanford who also misuse. I mean, there's lots of recordings of security guards getting drunk and
Right. Well, just go to the
um,
NRC alerts. They have people get what they call that misconduct of duty or something like that. There's a phrase they use there. It's very interesting. They send
yeah, and it
people home
happens a
all the
lot.
time. Yeah, they send them home all the time. And then they get fired or something, depending on how bad it is. I mean, or what they get caught doing. I
Right,
mean,
and then most likely they stay there because they can't get a job. They're not.
right.
I mean, the most people who work there as scientists who don't get in trouble will get a job at another reactor somewhere else, and they keep traveling around. Of course, because that's their career. But one mistake or one time you're caught, and then you can't get a job anywhere else. So then you end up staying there. And so then there is kind of generations of people who couldn't keep it together, that lived
Yeah,
there.
yeah, yeah. Well, that's the way
But
it is. There's many communities like that throughout our country. A lot of it does directly relate to the pharmaceutical industry, in my view. I mean,
right,
we have a culture that really is not meant to build people up. The American culture is meant to browbeat. This is why Trump is our president. He's the perfect picture of what America has become. If we don't like Trump, we need to change ourselves first.
right,
And so,
right. And that's how if we don't like Hanford, you need to move.
yeah,
But it is interesting. I did have a visitor who I haven't seen in 10 years who we actually both graduated from Evergreen State College, and we both ended up in the Tri-Cities because of our families. And I eventually left, and she stayed. And she's now on a camping trip with her kids going up and down the coastline. So she stopped and hung out with us. And it was really interesting because, of course, she shared with me about illness and people who were sick and struggling. But also she shared with me that there were people there who were upset and that wanted things to change and be
mm,
better. And she felt she was one of those people.
yeah,
And she was very defensive about how much people go through to try to educate each other while they live there. And I think that that's something
say that
I remember
again. Say that
there
she's
were
upset that she has to
with
bend over
people.
backwards.
No, she wasn't upset she had to bend over backwards, but she was upset and she was bending over backwards. She was making sure that she was talking in conversations. When she ended up at a dinner party and two people there work at Hanford, it's very common. Someone there is going to work at Hanford when you go
Yeah,
out.
that happened to
You
Glenn
know,
Woodford in Paducah. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you're gonna know, you're gonna find people who work there. But she said, she did engage in conversations with those people, and she did argue. That she would argue.
Mm,
So, because I remember you and I talking about how there was no one there who was speaking out,
yeah,
and how
yeah.
frustrating it is. But I think that just goes to show how loud the nuke industry is. It's so hard to speak above it and louder than it. You know what I mean? And just like
That's
us
a
talking
great way
about
to put
mental,
it. It's true. It is a very loud. That's exactly how it is. Because
yeah,
honestly, even with the microwaves, that's all sort of nuclear stuff. It's all sort of that same kind of technology. You can't see it, taste it, or feel it. And it
oh
is
yeah,
loud. It is loud. And, interesting she says that, because we do say that about the Tri-Cities, right? But when I first got into this, I didn't think there was I didn't think, I could not find 5, 10 people that were anti-nuclear people speaking out. And now 5 years, I don't know if people have newly gotten engaged, but I think they've always been there. Like Sheila Parks, she's been engaged in this. I never heard of her. It's only through, interconnecting since I've been doing this radio show, reaching out to people to interview, that I realized like there's a lot of people out there that have been
well,
engaged.
Lonnie, that's why what you're doing is so important. quite honestly, because you're right. When you're in it, you feel like you're alone. There's
Mhm.
often days that I have felt so much sadness for the earth because there was no one fighting the nuke industry. When I lived in Eastern Washington, like I wanted protests, I wanted marches, I wanted to do something to show people that people were pissed, you know? And so I would organize and I would get out there and I'd be the only person holding a sign.
Yep, I know that story. Me too, right
Yeah.
here.
And
Like I've
and I was
spent
a
money, put
crazy woman
flyers
on the
out,
street
talk to
corner.
people. People go, yeah, I'll be out there with you. I'll be there. What day? You write it down, you give them the flyer. Okay, I'll be there. And then you're out there all by yourself.
Yeah.
You put an
But then
ad
I
in the
stayed.
newspaper, nobody shows up. They'll honk, honk, honk.
Yeah.
Thanks for doing that for me.
Sure, but you know what? I'd stay out there and still do it because I'd like to think that that gave people courage to come out on their own and do it in their own, in their own ways,
Well, does she
however
have
they
any
feel comfortable.
allies in the Tri-Cities, your friend?
Yeah, yeah, she did, and she does, and it was really interesting. She was talking about how they, she has friends who work for the EPA, and she has people who work, for just different environmental parts of this whole cleanup. And she's just very hopeful, and she carried a big piece of hope in her that I had to respect, and I had to honor that because I do think that we need to have hope. But I also think, the gravity of the situation when you're so close to it, you tend to be used to it, so it doesn't seem so dangerous. It doesn't seem so scary while you're there.
Well, don't you think that's how
They,
we're all responding to it? Because to be frank, nuclear waste is everywhere, and we're all
sure,
doing the identical same thing. We all, that's
sure.
that spark of hope, but I think that's actually, after interviewing Charlotte Anthony and Chuck Heineman with the microbes, if they would just pour billions of gallons of microbes on that stuff, just pour it on the ground, wet the ground and pour it on the ground. I guarantee you, I bet you they would make so much more faster progress if they spent billions of dollars a year on microbes. They could
But I do
probably.
think they are using they're using every kind of science, at least out in Hanford. I mean,
Is
and
it
they don't.
working? Are they
I
do?
don't know. I keep going back to that they need to understand sciences way better before they start applying them. I feel like we're really
Yeah.
eager for solutions, and we um, continually to make it worse in a lot of ways.
Because we're trying something that we think is going to work without really verifying it, taking the time, you mean, to really
Yeah,
prove.
when we're right next to the river, and you throw those microbes in there, and who knows
That's
how they're
just
gonna.
disregard. You know what that is? That's a very anthropocentric deal. It's like this is our earth. We can destroy it if we want it. We know it's bad, but there's plenty of water on the planet, so don't worry about it. We have a right to do it.
Yeah, and now they take this attitude of like, how dare you condemn me? I'm fixing the problem,
Right.
But also
Yeah.
when I was talking to my friend about our friends who are professionals in fighting this war from the inside, um, I was thinking about these people, and I was thinking about their integrity and how much I trust these people. And she was saying on how it's not that bad, and they're convinced that it's not that bad. And it just made me realize again, Lonnie, of how much the numbers get fudged before they get to the people who sit in the offices and actually crunch them. I mean, that's the thing. That's a piece of this puzzle that I really feel like people are missing. And I'll use an example. So an example was we have a friend who works for Fish and Wildlife, and this friend has been studying the elk. And so this friend said that it's safe on Hanford because there's these 100 heads of elk who've lived there for the last decade and a half, and they've had like no stillborns, and they've had no tumors, and
What?
and so then when you're hearing that, right, you're thinking, well, that's because that information must have never got there. It really mustn't have gotten there. That's how construed our science is. Is we
Well, it's
think it's
kind of like that
fact.
lady. You want to know what? That's an interesting story. I interviewed a woman for my work. She called me up and was talking to me about her work, and she didn't need my services, but we were chatting, and she said she worked for the Washington Wildlife,
Yeah.
and so it was. She said all the time they saw two-headed snakes, and you never report it. In fact, one of her coworkers said something about the cougars because there was a time when they were doing the cougars and they had seen a two-headed cougar, but it died. Or what was it? The two-headed buck. That's what it was. They had seen a two-headed buck, and her coworker suggested that they warn people about this, and he was transferred the next day.
Right. Yeah, that
transferred. Now he didn't lose his job, but he was, and I mean, she said transferred like out of the office. He got noticed that day. The next day he was gone. He did not come back.
Yeah, because
his secretary packed up his stuff, or they had a secretary come pack up his stuff, and they said, "You're not coming back." So that is a very tight, controlled environment. If you can't even, while you're doing something else, report something else that you see.
But the headquarters for Fish and Wildlife is actually in Olympia, Washington. So that information gets collected at Hanford. Those people who see the weird things get relocated. The information that truly gets reported is botched, and then that information goes to Olympia, and then the headquarters says, everything's fine. We have everything fine.
Do you know, are there citizens now then in the Tri-Cities who are doing their own recordings and testing for radioactivity? I mean, Matt Holstrunk has been following the EPA tests for the radioactivity in our areas in Oregon and on the West Coast. He says they're pretty accurate, but when there's big spikes, their data disappears. They don't report the big
I believe
spikes.
I believe it. I do know of a gentleman named Jeremy Peterson who lives there, who is very active as an activist. But he's so interesting. He's really kind of obsessed about the robots because the robots is another huge industry.
I'm telling you, you need to listen to Jules's story, like the CRISPR, the robots, like all that stuff. The show that comes on before the first cup. You need to listen to that. You would love it, but really, you'd really much more understand it. I just get all emotional because it freaks me out.
Well, it's kind of freaky. It's really
there's stuff they're doing. It's like these people really are not. I mean, I wonder if it makes you wonder if they're really human, or maybe they're just so mentally ill. Like that's the interest. When we talked about this before about the mental illness, I think it's interesting because John Goffman showed that one of the first things that you get medical effects of low-level contamination, continued higher levels of schizophrenia. So we have people working in the industry because they're first exposed to it, who are working in the industry with schizophrenia. So then we give them pharmaceuticals to deal with the schizophrenia, right? But everybody, because the radioactivity is spreading, people are getting different symptoms. I know he studied schizophrenia. I think I don't recall if he studied any other, but I think he made a reference that there's a significant increase to mental illness across the board. It changes how you think.
And schizophrenia is interesting, right? Because that would be that you would believe you're seeing people, having conversations with people that doesn't exist. And so maybe even there's some twist to that because, there are people. Mental illness is such an interesting thing, Lonnie, and it seems like we know nothing about it. I mean, we knew nothing about it decades ago, and we've learned, light years of information about the brain in the last 10 years.
Look, this is the thing. Western medicine is so crude. It's unbelievable that we do not turn to Ayurvedic and Chinese medicine to try to understand the human systems. Our methods are so brutal. The AMA is a barely, I personally call them the American Murder Association. I don't trust them. I don't like them. They kill 1 million people a year.
It goes back to what people call a conspiracy, but I truly believe the nuke industry is the industrial complex. It is what is. Every kind of business is shaped around that. Most countries' politics are shaped around it. I mean, when you look at nuke energy, like here in Oregon, we're going through this heat wave that they're talking about, and they're so worried about power, and they're, nothing I've read has been about how to conserve power. Nothing I've read has been how to cool yourself or your house without power. Every article I've read is about how much we need power. how we will be short, and there'll be shortages and outages because of the draw of power, and we don't have enough supplies to meet the demand. And every time that pisses me off because, again, we need to learn how they lived without power, without air conditioning up until the 1950s. Like, there's ways to survive the heat. Of course, air conditioning makes it easier, but there are ways, but no
Look,
one
it's
talks
not
about
just
that.
the heat that we're living in. We're living in geoengineered heat, which is dropped aluminum on us in massive amounts. The chemtrails 3 or 4 months ago was so heavy.
Right. And so
And
you think that
and
heat
it's
wave is geoengineered with the aluminum. It just like creates more, it just raises the heat. And again, if they raise the heat, if they really can control our climate and they're raising the heat, then they're selling more energy. So then it's actually, again, going back to them. You know what I mean? Like, it seems like the nuke industry wins. It's a win-win everywhere. They give us cancer, so they fix it with
Yeah.
nuclear
Well, this is
medicine.
the whole modern industrialized age. They destroy our food supply. They take before you go into a hospital, the mother and baby lose their complete rights. They can do whatever they want, and they have. They used to radiate every single baby that was born from 1900 to like 1940 when they started asking for permission. If they
And
had it near a nuclear facility, that baby got radiated, every baby.
because then they can blame the fallout or
Well,
the
they wanted to
water.
test it. They wanted to see what it was like. So, look, and then the food supply, they destroy our food supply. They overprocess it. It makes us sick. We have to buy their insurance, to buy their pharmaceuticals, to pay their doctors. Like the whole thing is just us doing it literally turned the whole destroying the our sustainability on the planet ingratiated us to them. Like people need to know how. We don't know how to grow our own food. We don't know how to. People don't know how to cook. They think Taco Bell is food.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. I'm really lucky because I live in the rural Oregon, so we don't have fast food. My kids were like so impressed when we.
People don't understand. You say I live in Oregon, and so I've been there. And honestly, people who are from cities don't quite understand it. Like as a city person, I really don't understand the country life. So
You
when
just
I
can't go get something to eat. You have to grocery shop, and you have to put things. I remember my mother-in-law took my daughters to Kentucky Fried Chicken because my daughters love mashed potatoes. And instantly they fell in love, and they were like, "Oh my God, how could you keep Kentucky Fried?" Or they said, "How can you keep KFC from us?" And I said, "Well, because they have mutant chickens, and why would I feed you mutant chickens?" And they're like, "What?" And I said, "Well, yeah, KFC was one of the first people to start mutating chickens to have
I
extra legs and wings." I said, "That's why they're not called Kentucky Fried Chicken anymore, because they don't serve chicken anymore." Well, then my daughter got on Snoops, and she said, "I don't know, Mom. This is very arguable." But then I said, they have a lot of money to fight the science and the rumors. I mean, that's the
look,
thing is,
forget even if they're that, we know they're injecting, they're super GMO food. Those potatoes aren't real potatoes. Talk about probably eating food from Hanford or some nucleated area.
yes,
If it's food
sure,
at all,
sure.
that's the thing. But again, the issue of the nuclear contamination causing mental illness, it's kind of like people haven't even thought about how it affects global warming or the climate change or the interaction of it all. Like they're dumping aluminum on us. How does that affect us if there's like low level contamination all over the place?
Oh, it's probably giving everybody ALS and Alzheimer's.
Well,
There's
not me.
really,
I refuse that. Like, not me. Like, I'm going to say no to
I
that.
think so.
That's their paradigm. That's one of the things, like, for me, that's what motivates me, Wendy. It's like, I think that, I mean, Heidi, is that you're right about it. It does cause people mental illness. I think we're seeing a lot of it.
Right. And I also think, so radiation, I think, has like a physiology with our brain that creates circuitry in our brains. But so I think that that's very true. But I also think just the climate, the people, the way that they think that everything is safe. And that's what I remember the most about Tri-Cities is how much they made you think that you were crazy or I was, you know what I mean? Like that I was questioning science and science was facts. And so if I couldn't accept it, then I was crazy. And that's pretty much what happened to my dad, Lonnie, as well, in the 70s even. In the 70s, my dad would start getting really upset about how things weren't contained there. And I think I've shared with you before the story about the bird, where the bird pooped on his car window. And so when he went to work, his alarm, he triggered the sensors. And that's when he started to think about the birds coming and the cats eating the birds and the cats, pooping on the cat litter.
Like Dr. Weinberg said, well, if we can just find a cure for cancer, we don't have to worry about radiation limits, right? No, because all the animals, we can't give cancer treatments to all the billions of animals on this planet.
Sure, plants. I mean, that's just asinine. That again is just acting like it only affects one person.
Humans.
Or one kind
it's extreme anthropocentric view, extreme human-pointed view.
And this is, again, that problem with people who believe in robots and becoming cyborgs. Mm-hmm. We can put artificial limbs and artificial organs, and we can prolong ourselves and become these kind of cyborg/robots. But we're not going to do that to a tree. We're not going to be doing that to the grass.
You need to listen to Jules' show. Yes, they are. They are experimenting. I heard her show this week. They put some kind of chip inside of a turtle, and they were able to make the turtle go where they wanted it to go.
Right.
So, look, I think that it's the whole idea that that's even humane, or that that's where humanity wants to go with the science that we have, And I think it speaks to the bigger question, like you said earlier, about the nuclear and the military. Like, the military is the nuclear. Same thing with all of this. It's like there has been a military worldwide coup, and guess what? Bada bing. The White House is lined with generals and military people right now in the United States. Is that an accident?
But that's the whole time, too. Again, look how many soldiers have been exposed to radiation. Even in the Middle East, so many were, the depleted uranium and the depleted uranium dust was everywhere. And all of these poor gentlemen, or women, for that matter, people, come back from war. And what's happening? They're all killing themselves. On the highest suicide rate. And some of that, again, I think is mental illness. It's that we have this weird schizophrenia or paranoia or whatever. We're disillusioned.
Yeah, you want to talk about disillusioned and paranoid? It's totally hilarious. I just looked at what was the first year that the bomb was dropped, because now, here we are 45 years later or 60 years later. God, I guess how long it's been, a long time. Since 1945, when the first bomb was dropped in 45, right? But I was looking at it going, 45, huh? Trump is 45, and here we have all these military men. So see what I'm saying about the conspiracy theory and the paranoia? People begin to doubt themselves when it's obvious that we are in a time where I think quite literally they used 1945 and Brave New World as operating manuals.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the crazy people at the beginning of the turn of the last century, the ones who had all the money, the ones who started the World Bank and all those big banksters that are controlling the whole shebang right now through the military, went, wow, these are really good books. You're right. This could be the worst that would happen. So, hey, let's hire Edward Bernays and make it work.
Right. Yeah. No, I do. I think that there's blindness. That people, maybe it's because they're so narcissistic. That's what I think of when I look at today's politicians. They're just so narcissistic and so wrapped up in their own world. They're not seeing the effects of their decisions or the effects that are happening around them, the state that we're in. And we have so many millions of people right now who just want to go to work and make money and live the life that they're seeing on TV. That they don't want to believe that their water is polluted. They don't want to believe that fast food that's so easy to pick up is going to give them cancer.
Well, even if they do and they go to their doctors, their doctors are trained to say, no, you can still eat McDonald's, just don't eat it too much. Eat a balanced diet. And no, you don't need to take supplements. And just exercise. You're fine. And there is, and if you even talk about radioactivity, they're like, you're not listening to those conspiracy theories, are you? There's no problem. It's very low levels. It's not going to harm anybody.
My going to the doctor in the Tri-Cities was super frustrating for me because of them treating me like that, Lonnie. I was stung by a wasp that had like the craziest reaction ever, and I had to go to the ER. And when I went in, I said, "Gosh, is this a radioactive wasp?" And they looked at me like I was crazy, and they said, "Oh no, this is perfectly normal for an adult to get stung by a wasp and have this sort of reaction." And then within a year, I started reading on how Hanford was infested with radioactive wasps, mud wasps.
Well,
and that was one of the biggest dangers.
Is that the year you started detoxing?
That was the year I started thinking it was time to move. And then again, when we did move, a bee did fly in through the window and stung me. And I went straight to the ER again because it was just puffing up like crazy. And mind you, I've never been allergic to bees before in my life. And I was not stung by a bee. I was stung by a mud wasp. And when I did go to the doctors the second time, about 5 years later, and said, they said, "Are you allergic to bees?" And I said, "Only radioactive ones." They actually took me pretty seriously the second time, and so I don't think I was the only one. And again, it was very documented that Hanford was extremely infested with wasps.
Wow.
So again, it just goes on how they thought that it was contained. And the thing, this goes back, if you have radioactive wasps, think of how many things eat wasps, you know? Like how many different kinds of birds eat wasps, different kinds of bugs eat wasps, you know, so that's still, that radiation is just staying in that food chain. And it doesn't go away. It doesn't.
Well, not only that, it's blowing. Those containers, we haven't heard anything about that 1800. They put out their little study that says, yes, we know it's going to collapse more. So you think they're going to tell us about it again? No. When it starts collapsing, they're going to make sure nobody's around so they don't have to do any type of a notification to the employees. That's all.
No. Or the people who live there.
Yeah.
Even when it did collapse, there wasn't any. I mean, there was notification that on site there was they closed. What's it called when they keep the employees and not let them go home? You know, they
kind of like a lockdown.
Yeah, it was a lock and quarantine until that they were deemed safe to go home. So people, you know, are missing their loved ones for the afternoon, not knowing if they were gonna let them loose or whatnot. But no one said, oh, for the folks who live 10 miles away on the other side of the gate, you might be worried because this wind is blowing that way.
Heidi, can I ask you a question about your girlfriend, the one that came to visit you? Did she or either of her children have any problems, or their family have cancer, or the children have learning disabilities, or any type of birth defects that they had that they got surgery for or something?
Honestly, they do have a little bit of a learning disability.
Right.
But I do too. But again,
right. Well, you were born
illness there, or mental disability, or mental whatever, fragility. Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. Is like people who are active and normal, but just maybe have just a little glitch. You know, I think that happens probably to more of the population than we realize. And I don't think there's any studies of that, you know. I wish I could get a hold of studies of the schools. And that's another thing that is actually kind of interesting, because if you were to go and look at like testing scores, or even like how many kids they call it on IEPs or 504s, you know, like special learning plans.
Oh yeah.
Most of those kids are going to be migrant families. And so they're going to blame the test scores because that they don't have like English-speaking students, or that the families are coming from poverty. So again, it's another way that the facts are getting strewed. The numbers aren't true numbers, you know?
Well, they're not really looking. It's like the oncology rates. Nobody keeps track of where the cancers, how many cancers there are, and where people were born. I mean, there's three basic questions. Where were you born? Where did you grow up? and where do you live now, and what has been your exposure to chemical or nuclear contamination? Like, where did you live? All you have to do is look at the fuse wrap site. Just open up. In fact, they broke up the fuse wrap. I forget, there's another acronym, but there's two maps you have to look at to find all of the chemical and waste sites. And you can pretty
Yeah,
much tell.
and it's interesting too because my friend, I don't think her kids were born in the Tri-Cities, but they were born somewhere on the West Coast. So again, I think there's just like 172 reactors in the U.S.
Yes, and
So
we've had now 7 years nonstop Fukushima. 7 years. I mean, all you have to do to know the hazards of that is go to the Mass Animal Disc, the End of Times Prophecy. This lady, she's an End of Times person. I mean, it is beyond comprehension. The Mass Animal Disc.
The Great Coral Reef was just declared dead yesterday. The barrier reef in Australia, they were saying it's completely gone.
What? Completely dead?
That's what they said on this. I don't know how valid the site was, but
maybe that's why we have all these fish washing up, because a lot of those fish hang out in the reefs. They need the reefs.
Sure. Yeah, it's all a total ecosystem. But I have a hard time with people saying that the ocean is more polluted than our air. I really do, Lonnie, because I believe. I mean, think of how many above-ground bombs have gone off in the last 45, 60 years. So
a lot of it stays up in the atmosphere. Like it just went up there and it's still circulating around.
Yeah, totally. I truly believe it, and I think we've contaminated things. And I'm thinking about the mental illness, and I was thinking about the Bush era, and I remember that when we started to go into an economic crisis, one of the first things he did was he took funding from the mental health industry. And I think that in the last 15 years, it's just been taking more and more money. I don't know about, probably Eugene is one of the best places to get mental health. But here on the coast, there is no mental health here. For us to see psychologists or therapists, it's booked. It's really hard to get in. If you have a child who has learning disabilities or special needs, you pretty much have to go to Eugene or Corvallis to get them help. And I think that that's probably true for most of rural America. First off, you don't get the diagnose, so you don't even know that there's something wrong. You might even go to the doctor and say that you think there's something wrong with your kid, and they're going to tell you that there's not. That's something I've battled here on the coast, is just the school district, federal law is supposed to be testing kids. Well, they don't test the kids because they say they just don't have the tools and the people to do it.
I think a lot of the kids, we would see their whole physiology improve dramatically if we cut out all of the junk food. I mean, do not let them eat processed foods or chemicals at all, and no cheese and no dairy, and just cut that out.
That's the other thing that's crazy.
Because that stuff causes illness. It causes you to get sick. It causes mental illness. And it really, honestly, it's one of the symptoms of affluence. So-called affluence is you're able to eat a decent meal. Like that is, junk food is the substitute for the antiquity when everybody just got porridge. So now they just added chemicals to make it taste good. Go ahead, eat this plastic, because that's what a lot of the chemicals are.
We've had lots of conversations about what I think about junk food, and especially about French fries.
Yeah.
I mean, I definitely believe that almost all French fries are radioactive because of just their pull of potassium, and that they get cesium instead. And so I think fast food.
So do you think it's good to grow your own potatoes at home, considering we have a lot of, chemicals and radioactivity that's dropping on us?
Well, I guess I do. I guess I do believe that, but I also believe about intensity of radiation. When I So I live on the ocean now, and of course I'm worried about Fukushima, and I see my beaches dying in front of me. I don't see the same barnacles. I don't see the same kelps. Like, you can see that the micro parts of the ocean are changing. The starfish they had a starfish wasting disease that they say they're coming back from, but you don't see them on the beaches anymore. So I
Yeah,
see
well, that
that.
wasting disease was nuclear contamination. It melted their
I agree.
bodies.
I totally agree. But I also came from Hanford, so I also come from a place where, again, like the cattle had tumors. Every
Mhm.
cat, every pet I ever had died of cancer there. Um, so I believe that I know the world is contaminated. I know that radiation is present. But I still live my life, and I still do the best that I can to enjoy it. I still want to teach my children to appreciate the world and the environment and have respect for it. I think that the mindset is to teach our children that the outside is dangerous and to stay inside, and that they're safer if they stay inside. I've noticed a huge change in children where they don't want to go outside. They don't want to be in the sun. They don't want to play on the beach. And so I don't, that goes back to becoming robots. Maybe that is
I
what
think
is going
it's
to
that they're
happen.
sensitive to the chemicals and the aluminum and the radioactivity. I mean, I think that has. I mean, that has a. But also, that's if you let your kids near electronics. Like,
Sure, and
honestly, that's one of the
electronics
big
is a whole
things.
other vibe. It's a frequency. These are different like frequencies, I believe, that
Yeah.
we're putting ourselves around. And when that's interesting, I use the word frequency too, because when I go to Tri-Cities, I feel like I'm hearing a hum. I
I
feel
did
like
too when I was there. I went there, to protest up at Hanford. When I drove through there, Kevin and I mentioned it to each other. It sounds like a hum, like a weird. It's not like a hum you can hear, but there's a hum.
it's like a ringing
Yeah.
or just a frequency. I
It
feel
is
it when I'm
so
listening to the
beautiful there.
TV.
People do not understand how beautiful it is there, though. Oh my
Oh, it's
gosh.
breathtaking. And the thing is, again, we don't know what we're really looking at, Lonnie. It probably did not look the same 100 years ago. Now, when you go there, it's just grasslands forever. There's no sagebrush growing. There's no trees, or very few, and far between. Where probably 100 years ago, there was a lot more sagebrush that grew 6, 7 feet tall. But they frequently have wildfires, which I think are on purpose to help get rid of the radiation counts in the grasses and in the trees. So it is just it's like 500 acres of grassland with a really beautiful river that goes right through it. And I don't know, 14 or 17 fault lines that run underneath it. And then people populate all around it, and all of those folks are farmers, and they're working their butt off to feed the world. And then when they get sick, they're told it's because of the poisons and the herbicides and the chemicals they're using. I mean, chemicals is so broadly used, but really, it's so many chemicals come back to World War II, and so many chemicals were discovered when we had nukes. And so part of me feels like a lot of it's related. It's just called a different
Yes.
name.
Yes, that's why you can't really separate chemical pollution from nuclear pollution, really. They kind of go hand in hand. In fact, they've used the chemical pollution to like make you seem crazy if you even consider that nuclear contamination can hurt anybody. And they really honestly have not studied the testing. They really have just grotesquely just lied about it, kicked it down the can, and done wishful thinking. They've tested on a lot of different things, but not seriously on mental illness, childhood diseases. There has been no attempt to compare communities exposed to nuclear contamination and non-nuclear contamination.
Other than there was that one project that Helen Caldicott was behind. I want to call it was the Tooth Project.
I mean from
That
the
was
government. I mean from
oh right,
the
yeah, no, nothing from the
industries.
government.
You know what
All
I mean?
completely
Like the
independent.
people creating the pollution, the scientists working on the program, like Dr.
Right,
Goffman, that was originally his job, was he was working for the program. But then when he didn't start giving them the results that they wanted, they just started replacing them with people who will. That's why we're where we're at today.
right. No, and that's what I'm saying that the science is botched. I wish I could believe in science. I wish I could believe that everything was facts, but my gut tells me that I believe differently, and I've seen it different where things aren't being reported and things aren't being honest. And it's always to propel the nuke industry. And now currently in Oregon, we're creating these SMRs, the small modular reactors. And I get so much crap on my Facebook and so much crap in social media where people will sit and spend hours telling me on how this is the answer because now this isn't uranium, it's americonium, and this thorium is easier, and da-da-da-da-da. And they lose me as soon as they tell me it's nuclear. I'm just like, even though it's a different
Well, they're
kind of
not exactly admitting that americium is extremely harmful. They think that it's not. They're just believing the idea that it's not harmful.
Well, it supposedly it doesn't need to be exchanged as much or something, right?
It doesn't matter. How long does it last? Way too long. What is the effect on our bodies? Extremely bad. So
why do they think that making
terms.
little reactors and putting little reactors everywhere is better than big reactors that are somewhere? They're all mechanical and they're all bound to break. And,
I personally disagree with the human species saying that we have the right to alter our entire planet forever and make no amends. It's like a drunk who just beats his wife to death and then walks away and says, "What? I'm fine." That's exactly what they're doing.
Well, I feel like the nuke industry is like, well, we're providing cheap power for you, so you can't be angry at us because...
Yeah, well, that's like the guy's like, what? I make a lot of money. This is like, seriously, this is Trump. Like, he's like, I can do what I want. I make a lot of money. It doesn't matter. I help you. I'm helping you. No, you're not helping.
I could just blame him, but you know that Obama was just as pro-nuke.
Look, I do know that. And I'm not blaming him. I'm just saying he's a reflection. The difference with him is he actually is this person that says, I made money and I'm giving you jobs. He's lying about his jobs reports. He's lying about the money. I mean, but people are eating it up and saying, that's all true. That's all true. And it's the same thing with the nuclear industry. That's what I mean. Obama was the same way, but he didn't have the same status in terms of wealth.
Right. No, I just think that every president has been put in by the nuke industry.
You bet.
And every president since Kennedy. And we've had just pro nuke operations.
Probably since Eisenhower. You think Eisenhower wasn't put in by the nuclear industry? He wasn't promoted by them. He was there to oversee it. Yeah. When he left office, he gave us a warning of what might happen. That was a coded message of what did happen.
Right.
He didn't tell us what was going to happen. And here we are, like how many, 60 years later, and we're extremely uncomfortable. Let's put it to you that way.
Right, but we're also extremely in denial. And that's why people can keep building houses in the Tri-Cities and keep graduating from college and moving there and, building their little dream houses for their dream families and have these dream jobs. And they can fool themselves into thinking that they're helping find solutions, but really they're just continuing to propel this science and continuing to contaminate, essentially, the whole world. And so it's sad. It's a sad thing, and I don't really know any answers other than to fight like hell and keep telling the truth and keep going to our politicians and letting them know we see through it. Patty Murray, she's a huge pro-nuker.
I know she is.
She is. She's huge. I mean, Washington State is the most...
She worked to get Hanford to be a national monument. She's the reason we have tourists there. But you know what? There's ways we can fight back, though. Like, if we don't lean on the system, like, there are natural cures for, like, schizophrenia and mental illness. There's things that you can do. There's herbs. We do not have to rely on their pharmaceuticals, their chemicals, their lies. Honestly, there's things we can take it back.
But it just goes back to who has accessibility to that information and those services. And that's what I'm feeling.
We have accessibility still while we have the Googles. You just go online, natural cures for a plug-in, whatever it is it's gotten you. Because honestly, there's things that you can do that will help you. I know I've done that.
Well, I have a good friend who's actually going through chemo right now, and he actually shared with me just yesterday that there's a woman in town known as the Tea Lady, and the Tea Lady put together a tea just for him called Cure the Chemo Brain. Because he was
Good.
talking about when you go through chemo, how hard it is on just your mind, again, about mental illness. The chemo just takes your brain away. He said he just could not follow a thought. He was so easily distracted, and he shared a story about how he went to the store, got to the store, realized he forgot his wallet, drove home, got his wallet, got in the car, realized he didn't even have his phone, went inside, and then he saw his list. I mean, it's just like, again, another example of how radiation affects our brains. I mean, that's a perfect example. I mean, lots of people who go through chemo talk about how hard it is on their mind and thinking.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Well, you have to really do it. I mean, the best, from what I've read about the chemo treatment, if you're going to do it, it's best to do it if you're going to do it along with natural healing, like eat whole foods, get juicing. That's partly, I think it was the juicing that helped Kevin Blanch the most. Kevin got through cancer. When I first met him, he was going through cancer treatment, but he was in a program where every day they went in and gave him carrot juice, and they fed him juice 4 to 5 times a day.
right. So he just got intense vitamins and intense.
And it helps you.
I watched Kevin go through that, and I was very proud of him. And he has very exciting videos, and he talks with a lot of passion, and so I have respect for that. And I'm glad he's still with us. And I hope that more people who suffer from leukemia and cancer can kick its ass and survive it.
Well, I wish more people would get actively engaged in identifying it. See, this is what I respect the most about Kevin Blanches. He really says, look, this was caused by nuclear radiation. I don't care what you say. My dad was a nuclear veteran. Our family used to be super healthy, and now we got problems. And
they're from Utah too, right? They're right above where all the testing was.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, and Utah, did you read that story that they've actually there's a, what was it? Maybe I'm getting it confused. Livermore Lawrence Lab actually ended up sending barrels of nuclear stuff, plutonium, on a FedEx plane and didn't follow really procedures.
Oh my gosh.
And they do it regularly. And then I just read that there's some place in Utah where they have been cited repeatedly for not following procedure for managing their plutonium. I mean, the disregard for the contamination is off the charts in the nuclear industry. But
if they can't think straight, Lonnie.
Yeah, I mean, that's why maybe this conversation about mental illness is right. Like, maybe that's what we need is, I don't know, man. The challenge is getting anybody that's like Patty Murray. She's in the Senate. She would block any activity that would try to link radioactive contamination to mental illness. I mean, honestly.
She's the one that doesn't want anyone to know because Hanford brings in so much money. That's the thing that we have to understand about Washington was that Washington agreed for the feds to do the Manhattan Project with the Yakima Indian Reservation. They didn't know what they were agreeing to. Obviously. So they agree to it. It comes and it takes over pretty much the whole southeastern part of the state. They have one of the biggest messes in the world there. So their biggest fear is the feds will walk out and leave them with it. Washington can't afford this mess. They only did it for the money, and now they're realizing the mess is worse than the money. And that's why they keep doing these press releases about, the tunnel collapsing or...
This is why they want to do the Shimkus Act, the 3053, that we need to call. Still call your representatives and tell them, no, we don't want it. The Nuclear Waste Policy Amendment Act of 2000.
It's like a gag act, right? It's a gag act where no one...
No, they're selling that. They're going to basically privatize the nuclear waste. They're taking away congressional oversight. They're taking away safety impact reports. They're taking away safety analysis for transport. They are going to allow the people who own responsible for the waste to pay a one-time fee and then forevermore be free of any liability. And we begin paying them whether they have their storage facilities or not right away.
Yeah,
and what else? And we take the right of, let me see, there's one more, it's really egregious, but It's based on this theory is that they really do not, they don't want, you hit it on the head. They do not want to have to be responsible for the waste.
No, because
That's
it's the thing about the waste is there's no cure, there's no fix. So this is, and to get people to work next to it, you have to pay them a lot of money.
But you know why
So
there's no fix? Because they have not attempted. All they've been doing is taking money for shifting it here, shifting it there. That's all they've been. They have not been doing work. They've been doing work to like figure out how to get out. They pay attorneys billions of dollars to squirm out
sure,
of paying anything, and they have
sure, and
not
they
spent
spend.
any real money. We don't have billions of dollars of microbes being poured on Hanford every day. We have maybe a few $1 million. That's not
We
enough.
have we have $1 million worth of plastic bags
Oh, this was the
being
big one.
part.
It preempts state, local, and federal water rights, and
Yeah,
state and local utility and air rights. Like we with this policy nuclear waste act, I know I sound like a repeating drum here to my listeners, but we really must call our Congress people and tell them if this comes up on the floor, vote no. Nuclear Waste Policy Amendment Act of 2017 takes away our water, air, and utility rights so that a company like Bechtel can come in your community and pour the nuclear waste right off the coast and say, oh, we're just going to dump this in the ocean. And your state will have, and the federal government, the state, and the local will not have a right to do that for water and say, no, you can't.
right. And
This
Washington,
bill,
folks in Washington need to call that the most. You know, it's going to affect the
well,
people
you
that
know what
live
you need
around
to
it.
do is call everybody you know that's up there in Hanford that's, friendly and let them send them to Donna Gilmore's page, the new San Onofre Safety, because she has a little short sheet on it. Because if they're in Washington and they're there and they're living there, maybe they can get people up there to really, because there's Democrats even in Oregon. In fact, it's your guy, aren't you, in Newport? Your
Yeah,
representative sponsored this bill on the 17th or 18th. He's became a co-sponsor. So you
is it
need to call him and
Murphy
tell
or
him no.
do you know which one it is?
Schrader,
I'll
isn't
look
it?
at
Isn't it?
Strider. Okay. Yeah, I
Yeah.
know who that is. Okay, I'll look him up too and thank him. Or no, not thank him. He's the one that did the bill. Is that what you
Yeah,
said?
he's co-sponsored it. So you need to tell him to change his mind on 3053 Nuclear Waste Policy Amendment Act. And I faxed him a copy of this thing.
That's interesting, Lonnie. I'm really grateful you're sharing that with me because also Oregon State University has Ocean University here in Newport, and they're the ones that are designing the
Right.
SMRs.
They're
And so
not
there's
designing
actually
them, they're selling them. They plan on building them all over Texas.
yeah, it's
Heidi, we
new
have about a
scale.
minute left. Yes, it is new scale. Yes.
They're new scale. But they were designed through OSU.
Yes.
The OSU had a huge part in it. But thank you, Lonnie, for having me on the radio. Yet again, the hour just goes by so fast. I don't even feel like we covered mental illness, although we did talk about it a lot. And but everyone needs to be careful out there and be safe and look out for each other. And when we start
Yeah, and
acting
have some
weird,
compassion and remember that people, it's not really what it may appear to be. It might be a real mental illness, might be a disorder. They're suffering internally. So,
well,
well,
wasn't it you that said it's 3 generations? So even though they're
Dr.
suffering real,
Caldecott said 4 to 8 generations. That's when the worst shows up. We have about 15 seconds. You've been listening with Heidi Lambert from No Nukes Northwest. Thanks for joining us, Heidi, and I hope you come back again.
of course. Thanks, Lonnie.
Put your courage feet on, you guys. We'll talk to you tomorrow.